Hello and welcome to Media7, I'm Russell Brown. It's hardly unprecedented for the news media to be the story in an election campaign, Corngate anyone, but to be the subject of a criminal investigation in the campaign's final week, that is unusual. We'll be talking about that and more, but first, Jose Barbosa surveys the little campaign that came over all strange.
About 2 weeks ago, 400 people walked into a cafe.
Are we going to have Bill Maher or Chinese?
Unfortunately, things were about to go bananas.
This is the moment that John Key discovers a concealed recording device has been put on the table.
It seems likely the two men discussed the future of Don Brash and the ACT Party, and that unfavourable comments may have been made about New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters and the older voters who tend to support him.
This was a deliberate action by the Herald's Weekend paper.
National says that's illegal and has now laid a complaint with the police.
The good thing is we've lowered the crime rate by 7% right across the country, so they do have a little bit of spare time.
Let me assure him and all New Zealanders that there are no police officers out there with time on their hands.
Banks appeared stunned by how pear-shaped it all had gone.
Did you say during that conversation that the ACT Party would be rejigged, would be restructured?
I can't even remember saying that.
Meanwhile, John Key shot out of tricky questioning like a salmon covered in smegma. Close Up brought in a lip reader and blew the case wide open.
The name beginning with B?
B. Brash?
Yes, that's it.
Oh,
he mentioned
okay.
that. Yeah, definitely Brash. Yeah, he mentioned that name.
But while Paul Holmes was understandably amused, inappropriate touching in the workplace is never okay. And more than anything, the whole episode has proved to be an effective way of reanimating tired old flesh.
That's what you're going to hear in these tapes. What some young turkey thinks of your efforts.
So far, the election campaign's been like a ride on Wonka's boat of insanity. Some of the worm herders in TV3's Leaders Debate may have been left-leading intruders.
Now, Roy Morgan, the market research company that ran the reactor worm, has defended suggestions that Labor activists were among the studio audience.
Meanwhile, Native Affairs has been featuring communities not normally catered for by commercial television.
I don't think they have a real understanding. Come shake hands, kiss babies, plant a tree here and there with a photo in your neighbourhood, and it's meant to go, oh yeah man, they're really getting involved, but not really. So at the end of the day, they don't really know shit about our neighbourhood.
Phil Goff's been ignoring the homework schedule.
Yeah, I got it right here.
Without looking. Do you know without looking?
No, I'll give you the figures just to make sure I've got it. Yeah, it's 78 billion.
And everyone's having a good old laugh at Uncle Arthur.
It's a zero. It's a zero.
But even though it will all be over soon, I'm fairly certain the scars will remain.
And on the 26th, go pick up your nana and don't you forget Joe. Party vote mana.
Don't give a scrope. You don't need to vote. As for me, I'll be voting John Key.
Oh. So, what to make of it all? I'm joined by the listener's live blogger and the man who coined the Teapot Tapes hashtag for Twitter, Toby Manhire. Lecturer in Political Studies and Social Sciences at the University of Auckland and AUT, and former electorate and campaign secretary of the Helen Clark, Edwin Durand, and the host of Māori Television's deservedly award-winning Native Affairs, Julian Wilcox. Welcome to you all, gentlemen. Toby, I didn't actually want to spoil this by checking, but it strikes me you've used the phrases extraordinary day and remarkable day more times than might have been expected at the beginning of what seemed to be going to be a fairly mundane campaign.
You've caught me. Yeah, probably overselling it. Certainly, there was a period there when it felt pretty remarkable, hour by hour. Maybe we got a bit overexcited, some of us, in the middle of the Teapot Tapes scandal, but certainly it was pretty gripping. We got excited, perhaps because we're journalists. What was it, a classic Thorndon bubble story, as Stephen Joyce informed us it was? I don't know. It didn't seem that way at the time. But their media strategy worked, didn't it? And that they decided to shut it down. We thought they were being foolish, and the polls suggested that they had it spot on.
Was there a big divide between what we as journalists regarding this as a big story thought and what the general public thought? Because there seems to have been that.
There does seem to have been that. For my money, it was a fascinating story that had all sorts of elements and all sorts of dramatic twists and turns. But obviously it played into a sense that the media were controversialist and hyperbolic, and the key campaign pushed that line, and it seems to have paid off.
Are we just political nerds, Edwin?
Are we just political nerds?
Yes. We're all excited
As in,
about
does
this. The public just wants it to stop, yes.
I'm not sure. I think there's a lot of spin actually around just what the public thinks about this. I mean, obviously National wants it to go away as quickly as possible. It's probably true that people that are interested in politics and people that are interested in the media see that this has quite important democratic implications as far as the Fourth Estate is concerned.
Well, we saw Stephen Joyce last Friday use National's internal polling in public, which is really quite unusual, and it seemed to have been conducted for that purpose.
It is. That is quite bizarre. He didn't use all of the polling results that he had at hand, of course, and I suspect that was more about trying to create public opinion rather than actually reflect it. It was a very partial account of the data that he had at the time, from what I gather.
Now, you were in the room for the 2002 Corngate affair. Would you compare what's gone on the last 2 weeks to that?
Well, it does have some similarities. I guess, you know, the main one is that it's a campaign grenade that's come out of nowhere. Nobody saw it coming, and it's certainly set the cat amongst the pigeons. Certainly Corngate shaved, you know, maybe between 5 and 8% off Labor's, what was at the time a majority lead in the polls. Went from about 51 down to 45. Whether or not that will, you know, translate in the current election, whether or not we're going to see that same sort of drop in National's polling, I'm not so sure.
Well, indeed, it seems that sending in the cops has worked quite well for them. Now, we've both seen a University of Canterbury media monitoring study that's out on Friday that found that ACT's media coverage went from negligible before this whole affair started to huge, and Labor's went the opposite way. So it hasn't worked out for Labor, has it? They've lost visibility.
Well, that's true. It's displaced a lot of coverage from Labor. Obviously, Labor wanted to keep talking about the asset sales and the things that made them look strong. On the other hand, I don't believe that all publicity is good publicity. It's not, especially not in an election just before an election campaign. It's been very damaging for ACT. And I think to some extent it has been damaging for National insofar as John Banks is to John Keys, a little bit like what Winston Peters was to Helen Clark in the last election. There's a contamination factor going on there, but whether or not that will actually filter through into the polling on election day remains to be seen, I suppose.
Julian, was this a big story on your turf, or is it a different campaign for your audience?
Oh, there was initial follow-up because it happened just around the corner from Māori Television Studios. It was on Carlton Court Road there, so there was some initial interest in the story, but a lot of people I think in our audience were thinking, well, if John Banks is a guy that can go into a live interview studio situation and say he's worried about brown people climbing into windows in Epsom, what's he going to say in private? And when it became kind of clear that that actually wasn't part of the conversation, then I think it lost a lot of interest with our audience. And we canvassed a bit of opinion with question askers because we were getting people to ask questions to the candidates themselves in our Māori electorate debates. There was no interest from the candidates, from the question makers or the candidates actually. They wanted to know things like, you know, high unemployment, job loss, disengagement with Māori youth, child poverty, child abuse. The bigger issues are still the ones that people want to discuss.
Yeah, and your electorate debates, I have to say, I thought came off really well, and they were different than anyone else has done, if only because we saw and heard from the audience. Was that a key thing for you when you were planning them?
It started off with our Taitokerau by-election debate, actually, and we did polling, and we found that actually a lot of people didn't like the polls because it was simply too small. It was going to cost a lot of money to try and get 1,000 Māori voters in a Māori electorate, and we didn't have the money to be able to do it. So we had to kind of cut away from everyone else's format. We remembered the old school kind of town hall debates. One of the last ones I remember was Jim Bolger and Mike Moore, I think in the 1990s election, and we thought that that might work. And one of the things we wanted to hear was what were the main issues for the people in those electorates, engage their concerns. Most of them were the same, although there were some unique kind of issues in the electorates themselves.
I mean, don't take this the wrong way, but I thought what you ended up with was a kind of political, it's in the bag. You went to these places, you got on breakfast, you know, iwi radio, and you got some hype about it. It had that sort of feel. Yeah, there was a bit of life to it.
We wanted to engage the communities because, you know, you're dealing with a finite audience and a mighty audience anyway, and then when you're going into those electorates, you're dealing with another smaller set of figures or another smaller set of audience numbers, and so the ratings were never going to be high anyway, but what we wanted was engagement, and at the end of the day, I think we're all just trying to disseminate information to enable voters to make a clear decision or inform voters to make a decision on the day itself, and people liked the idea that they could get up and put questions to the candidates, and they didn't want a bun fight, they didn't want people to have a go at each other, which apparently some Māori are known for, but they wanted to just hear them answer the questions that have been put to them. And, you know, a lot of the anecdotal feedback is that we kind of got it okay.
Yeah, I think they worked really well. I think those, in a funny way, the Kōwhiri series and the Backbencher series are very different in their presentation in one way, and another way they're really similar because they drill into one electorate. And even though they're discussing that constituency, they actually have ideas and debate in them that appeal to everyone. You don't have to be vested in Te Tai Tokara or in Ohariu to be interested in those arguments. And similar thing happened on radio, actually, some of the ZB debates. I think they're quite rewarding.
And all of them had more or less constant live commentary on social media, on Twitter in particular. That must have worked quite well for you as a live blogger.
Yeah, I mean, I've been sort of glued to Twitter. I've got this ridiculously large tweet deck running all the time, like a Starship Enterprise. And the stuff coming through is really useful.
And then, of course, we had the downside of Twitter, the utter confusion around the announcement of Justice Wynne Kelman's decision, where we got pretty much every possible permutation from different media organisations. I think that showed that did show the downside of constant presence, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. It's one of the functions of breaking news now that the rush to be first means that sometimes it's wrong. The last time, weirdly enough, the last time I saw that happen was in the Amanda Knox case in Italy, where there was a slightly subtle judgment given and people leapt to she's guilty still, and that was wrong, as it was wrong in some of the original tweets, one of which I retweeted earlier on Wednesday.
Edwin, it seems like after every election, I think since about 1996, someone's done a PhD on the impact of social media, and it generally comes out as not that much. Do you think it's any different this time?
I think it's slowly building, and I think in some ways where the social media has an impact, ironically enough, is that it actually influences the way that the mainstream media start to report things. The mainstream media are very interested in what their audiences are thinking. So it's that kind of indirect route, I think, where social media are actually starting to play a part. But it's a gradual thing, but I think it will continue to increase over time, especially as mainstream media start to diminish in their influence.
Now, Julian, you had that for your audience as well. You had your hashtag, your native Kōwhiri. Did that work for you?
Yeah, it generated a lot of feedback. What we tried to do was we wanted people to kind of make questions and answers. I think that's my phone, sorry. We wanted people to put questions on the native Kōwhiri hashtag so we could put them to the candidates themselves, and the format allowed us to be able to do that. But it also gave people the chance to be able to voice their opinion on A, the format of the debate, whether they liked it or not, B, the performance of the candidates, and C, any other comment they wanted to make about the show itself. And that was really helpful for us. And you don't take these things, seriously all the time. You don't take them at face value. You have a look at it, and it's a good way of just gauging the kind of opinion. And when most of the opinion was saying, look, we like the idea of the debate, there are some tweaks that we would make, we thought, well, we're kind of on the same path, let's just keep, we're kind of on the right path, let's just try and keep it going. The really cool thing was that you had a number of people simply saying that, we had some young candidates that no one had ever heard of before. And the instant opinion was it was great to see a varied an array of new Māori politicians who may have a future. A guy like Jack McDonald and Te Tai Hauauru, 18 years old, fresh out of Kapiti College. No one had heard of him before. And he got a lot of feedback.
I think Makaurau Curtis on your last debate as well. We do need to wrap here, but I wanted to make the point that for all its worthy purposes, social media also generated quite a lot of humour, which was most welcome. Anyway, we must go now, so thank you Toby Manhire, Edwin Durand and Julian Wilcox. After the break, a provocative documentary for election week.